You're listening to Innovators, the podcast from Harris Search Associates, where we speak with global leaders in education, research, engineering, and the health sciences, and ask them to share lessons learned as they continue to advance the frontiers of innovation and discovery. Today's podcast will be led by Rick Skinner, Senior Consultant.
After persuading our guest to sit for an interview, some additional research we did about her enlightened us to her childhood interest in and talent for improvisation, not something usually associated with the practice of medicine, with its emphasis on protocols and regimens. But Dr. and Dean of the School of Medicine, Jennifer Christner of the Baylor College of Medicine, chose medicine over improvisation. And as the Houston Chronicle reported, she discovered that her stage presence came in handy. As dean, she employs the public speaking skills that helped her as an actress. And there seems to be more to her affinity for improvisation, particularly since she enrolled in acting courses after accepting her post as dean. As Stanford's Patricia Ryan Mezzo observed, the practice of improvisation, in contrast to, say, to the writing or painting, teaches something that we are all hungry to understand: how to be in harmony with one another. We practice improvisation not only to express ourselves, but to connect with others in a more immediate way. The ability to connect with others no doubt also explains why Dean Christner is a pediatrician specializing in that most mysterious field of adolescent medicine, as well as winning teaching awards voted on by medical students at the University of Michigan, where she was assistant dean of curriculum. She joined Baylor as dean in 2015 from SUNY Upstate Medical University, where she was associate dean. Her undergraduate degree was in biology from Ohio State, and she earned her medical degree from the University of Toledo and completed her residency at the University of Michigan. One last comment on Dr. Christner's thespian skills and talents. Over a year marked most frequently by tragedy, doctors and nurses and all the other people involved in providing care were and still are called upon to be patients' principal and sometimes only companions as treatment begins, progress is monitored, and in most cases, fortunately, the patient survives. But it is also the case that healthcare providers are the persons called on when the disease prevails and the patient dies. The ability to improvise in those moments is, as Professor Madso noted above, a way for making contact with and understanding more fully patients in the most extreme moment of life. The word improvisation can suggest manufacturing one's emotions and offering a sort of put-on compassion. But doctors and nurses, and I suspect Dean Christner, know that the care they render at the end of life is one point on a continuum of care and no less needy of compassion than the moments of joy. Welcome to Innovators.
Thanks for having me.
We are now in the second year of the COVID-19 pandemic, so it may not be too crazy to think about what the enduring effects of the virus could be. We learned that the American public health system is not really a system, so much as it is a somewhat fragmented and loosely connected constellation of national, state, and local organizations that struggle mightily to operate and cooperate in the absence of something or someone to help align the parties for action. But the public health challenge inevitably comes down to a patient, physicians, nurses, and all the other care professionals involved in tending to the victims of the disease. And it seems safe to say that much, very much was asked of these people, and few were spared. And while stories about the Dr. Fauci effect that led to increased interest in medical school admission applications are very encouraging, those tales are matched by ones of healthcare professionals feeling overwhelmed by the experience of delivering care to patients in great numbers, many of whom, the elderly, persons of color, and those with chronic diseases, were especially vulnerable to the disease and made up a disproportionate number of deaths from COVID-19. You lead a medical school. What do you see as the major effects on medical education from the pandemic experience? What is it likely to change in terms of what and how students learn in order to practice medicine at a time of more frequent infectious diseases?
So I think that there are definitely going to be some longstanding changes in medical education given the pandemic. Some of them are very simple and some are much more complex. So let's take a simple one.
Mhm.
So a simple one is that I always thought it was ridiculous to require medical students to attend lecture. And in fact, I made sure that that was never a requirement, that they should only attend if there was active learning going on. And so I think what was demonstrated beautifully is that students don't need to be at a lecture to be able to learn, right? And in fact, there was some better teaching and learning going on virtually. And so what I mean by that is our students have said, our professors really went out of their way to be available to the students on Zoom and have special office hours and such in a way that they hadn't done that before. And all of our students have said, please keep that up. Like, please don't take that away when we kind of go back to being in person. We really love this more intimate and frequent access to our faculty, and we would love that to stay. So that was great. There's other, minor things. We had to shift very quickly and organize our courses better and just do things that are better for medical education pedagogy, have videos of all of our teachers saying hello and introducing themselves, just on and on and on, just some very simple things that just we should have done a long time ago, but we didn't. Long-term, I think issues are one of the things that we had some very active discussions about nationally in medical education is, are medical students essential or not? And there was quite a vigorous debate. So in fact, even medical students were on both sides of that fence, where some saying, I'm not essential, right? I should not be in the hospital. I'm just a vector. There was a paper that was written by a student published about, I'm a vector, you shouldn't have me in, versus students saying, this is my profession now, and I want to help in any way that I can. And so, to be honest, I took the standpoint that I did feel that medical students were in fact essential, and that they're an essential part of the healthcare system. And that while they may not have been able to do some of the doctor duties because they're not physicians yet, there was just a myriad of other ways that they could make themselves extremely helpful to, as you said, our workforce that was just overburdened and overwhelmed, right? And so I just feel that they are absolutely essential. And if we treat our colleagues as if they're not essential, I think that that's just a really bad message to be sending. I'm hoping that there's continued debate and discussion about that, to the role that medical students have, and that they are always considered essential members of the healthcare team.
Yeah. Just to go back on one thing, it strikes me as it's kind of ironic that distance learning or telehealth or telemedicine, whatever you want to call it, actually in the case at Baylor, actually created more intimate interpersonal engagement than if they'd gone to a lecture.
Yes.
So that somehow seems at least ironic, at least. And wow, that's a big difference. It says, however, that the most precious commodity any physician, especially a faculty member, has, time, it becomes even more precious. Will physicians, especially in the academic setting, be able to sustain that level of engagement with students going forward?
So I hope so, in some ways, because how many medical schools have things set up is that the faculty who do a lot of the teaching do get some protected time to do that teaching. And so hopefully that will continue, if not in fact grow, so that those faculty will continue to have the time to interact with the students in that way. Yes.
Yeah, I always thought of it as a kind of zero-sum game in many ways. If you choose to be a researcher, you don't do something else. There's no way to cut it up into more pieces of the pie that doesn't equal 150%. Right. So that's obviously not going to work.
Right.
You're recognized by your peers as an expert on accreditation and reaccreditation of medical school curricula. And of late, new schools such as the Carl, Illinois Medical School have been launched on the basis of a very deliberate effort to offer a different approach to medical education. In the Carl, Illinois case, and here I quote from the school's website and from an earlier interview we had with Dean King Lee, the model is the first in the world to integrate engineering principles in teaching medicine. Our four-pillar approach infuses basic sciences, clinical sciences, engineering and innovation, and medical humanities into all 4 years and produce graduates who are innovative and leaders. In addition, some osteopathic medical schools are very self-consciously built on preparing graduates to be family doctors and primary care physicians rather than specialists, and that aim is being built into their curriculum. And then is there some inevitable tension between existing accreditation standards and innovative curricula? Tension that might in some way inhibit medical schools who want to reform curricula from undertaking it. And they do so out of fear that that's somehow not going to, and it will somehow diminish their chances of becoming accreditation. Is innovation encouraged by the accrediting process or discouraged?
I would say it's actually neutral. So there's actually no reason that you can't innovate in any way that you can and still meet accreditation standards. I mean, to me, accreditation standards should be the bare bones minimum of what you're doing. And then you do so much above that. I think there's also some misperceptions about what accrediting bodies require. And I can't speak for the LCME. I'm not on the committee any longer or anything like that. But what I will tell you, if you look at the accreditation requirements, which are available to anybody online, they are very non-prescriptive. So while there are certain things that are required, I get questions all the time like, well, isn't this rotation required? You know, don't you all have somebody come to you? And I'm like, no, actually, none of those rotations are required at all. You may have to teach certain objectives, but none of them are actually required by our accrediting body. So there's a big misconception about what you have to do. And I would say that a lot of what the LCME requires just goes back to really good foundational medical education principles, like that you need to get grades in on time. Students deserve to know what their grades are, that you need to give them feedback, that they need to be directly observed. There's a whole host of elements that are actually really good for medical education. So there is no reason why somebody should not be able to be as innovative as they want and still meet accreditation requirements.
There's a pervasive notion, and I'm sure you must know it, that no, those are highly prescriptive and they really get down into the weeds. You're saying, one, first of all, this is the bare bones of what you need to do to be a medical school. And two, there's nothing in there that tells you yes or no, you need to do a preceptorship this way. My question is, why does this sense prevail that yes, it is prescriptive and no, you can't try anything new?
I think there's two reasons. I think one is there are a lot of requirements, right? I mean, there are. And well, I call it that, and they wouldn't like me much for saying this, but I think there's kind of a hidden curriculum, right? So there, in some ways, I wish that they would actually be more prescriptive on some things and just say, look, if you do this, you will be fine. So just here's what you should do, or here's the gold standard, right? But they don't want to do that. And so I think that makes things harder a little bit there. I consider myself an LCME whisperer, where I can like the horse whisperer, where I can kind of like understand the requirements and what they really mean and what they want. But I think there's just a lot of fear. There's a lot of myths out there about what you can do. And there are a lot of requirements, but there's a lot of things that people think are requirements that in fact are not requirements. And I just hear it over and over again.
But you're just giving me a whole new realm to go into, and that's being an accreditation whisperer. Yeah. I have visions of that, but I'm not going to share those at this moment. It's a little too much. Not there. Okay, let me move on quickly before we both get in trouble. One of the things I've told you already, how much as a firm we admire what Baylor has done in recruiting an extraordinary diversity of students at one of the most selective schools of medicine in the country. Maybe you're an admissions whisperer too, but there is a real reason to say, how did this come about in such a way that in particular, women of color are present and not simply admitted to, but complete medical degrees at Baylor School of Medicine? How did that come about?
So I can definitely say it was with intention. And what I can say is actually, if you look at our trends, we did experience actually a dip. We weren't happy about that dip. And we said, okay, what are we doing? What's going wrong? So there was a lot of effort and a lot of intention. And so it was a few things. So one, we had our admissions committee underwent holistic training from the AAMC. And I have to give them props. It was actually excellent. And not just to AAMC, but the admissions team And the whole committee was just very engaged and really took in the information.
Great.
And then not only did they take it in, but then they actually applied it. The admissions committee acts on its own, but I definitely made it clear that this was a priority, that we needed to really think about this. And every discussion we had was about, are we recruiting holistically? Are we really following what our mission, vision, and values are? So it became very concrete again, where I think it had been a principle, but it wasn't like concrete and ingrained into our daily activities of living. So there was that. I'm also not going to lie about the fact that we had an infusion of money to help with scholarships. I think if you don't have that, there are, as of right now, there are not a ton of these types of candidates, and hopefully there will be more and more and more, but in some cases there are not as many. And so they are hotly recruited, and you do need to have some scholarships to be able to get them. And so we were very fortunate to be able to also say, this is really an important priority for us. And we were able to attain some diversity scholarship money as well, which was a good thing.
And that points up two things. One is, it sounds as though you've gone well beyond the old argument of this is a morally right thing to do. You've gone beyond that. You've accepted that, obviously, but you've gone beyond that. So you're now getting down into, this is better for us as a Baylor Medical School, than as much as it is for the students. So that in itself, I think, suggests that we've come to recognize diversity as not just a good moral thing, but a good quality thing.
Right.
The second point is this, the importance of financial aid. We know that there is a terrible correlation between household income and race. We know of that. And in the absence of financial aid, many students of color are frozen out completely. I talked to Christina Gonzalez. She's at Alfred Einstein School of Medicine. She's done a lot of work on diversity and implicit bias. And one of the things I think Christina pointed out to us is that if you don't let people on admissions committees know about implicit bias, that no matter how virtuous you think you are and how committed you are enhancing diversity, we are all partial of a society that has implicit bias. And it sounds as though you took that battle on there also. If everybody sort of raises their hand and says, yeah, I'm just as guilty as the next, so that you've gotten beyond just doing it because it's the right thing and maybe the legal thing to do. It seems to me, secondly, you've done what almost always needs to be done, put money where your mouth is, and you've gone out and found ways to help fund these students.
Another thing that was really important is when we actually talked about diversity, yes, we talked about diversity of gender and of color and race, but we also just talked about diversity. So what backgrounds were students coming from, that they weren't all science backgrounds, right? So diversity of thought and diversity of degrees, just really the whole thing. And I think that was actually really impactful too, to think about. We just don't want straight up biochemistry majors with a 4.0, right? We want diversity of everything.
That's a great point, because I think one of the things that I recall most vividly was when I was still in academia. It just happened that one of the members of an admissions committee was a handicapped individual, had severe handicaps. And I must tell you, she opened up the minds and eyes of all of us involved by simply saying, do you understand that by saying this, you're precluding a fairly large portion of the population? And so again, we see that diversity, once you establish the moral rightness of it, it gets it down to it can be a competitive advantage, but it can enrich your own education and curriculum. Don't slow down. You are probably the third or fourth female dean of medicine that we've talked to in the last few years. And it's wonderful to have the chance to do so. There was a time when it was sort of like an old boys network. You could predict what the person was like and easily. Still, women remain very distinctive minority among school deans. You are one of a very small group of people in the 100 and X number of institutions. It's just a case of, well, we just have to be patient, and the trends will someday come along and they'll catch up and so forth. Is it sort of like waiting for Godot, which, if you remember the play by Beckett, Godot never shows up. Where are we heading? And is there any reason we should expect in any reasonable period of time to see gender pretty much eliminated as a factor in the person becoming a dean of medicine?
So I really am hopeful that we'll get there. We have now for, I think, at least 2 years in a row, we've admitted more women than men to medical school. So I think eventually the numbers are just going to catch up. But I agree, we can't just rely just on that our numbers are such. I think there is, again, intentional mentoring and intentional role modeling that can come from women and men, to be honest, right? From everybody.
Sure.
And I do mentor a lot of young men and women in their academic careers about what it takes to move up the ladder. I do think that there are some differences. I mean, they're studied and written about in books that there are different characteristics or different ways that, women and men look at jobs and how they apply or don't apply and things like that. So I have open conversations about that with everybody that I mentor. And I think those are important conversations to keep having. But I do think that we should see, I'm hopeful that gap will close sooner rather than later.
Over the past 2 or 3 decades, there have been 2 interesting trends that you can see in the education of doctors in the United States. And for a time, a business school offered MBA programs to physicians in ways that accommodated the schedules of doctors and provided graduates with knowledge and skills to manage their private practices when there still were private practices. Or they made it possible for doctors to adapt to the business and financial demands that were taking place. Then, I guess it was around the turn of the century, MDs began enrolling in Masters of Public Health degree programs. Part of that, I think, was there was a push, say, we need to get back to promoting good health, not just treating illness and solving injury problems. Do those 2 trends, and they're both very different and operating for different ways, do they foretell anything to you about the kind of additional education, especially for the academic medical people? Do you see anything that would tell us what's the next sort of flavor of the week? Because it really was substantial to the point now where you can look at many of the top medical schools and you'll find that almost everybody has an MPH, for example. Anything in all of that you see that might say that's the next field?
So I think one of the next really hot, well, it's already is a hot field, but the next one is bioinformatics or big data, looking at big data. So that's actually probably going to be the next dual degree that we pursue to get as an institution. And that's just huge right now, right? Is how to use all this huge data. So I think that is likely to be one of the next big ones.
I can remember when the phrase precision medicine became being batted around. Do you see that the movement toward a greater emphasis on bioinformatics leading us to a greater precision in terms of diagnosis?
I think it could. I think that those 2 kind of go hand in hand a little bit, right? So being able to look and analyze that data is going to give us better statistics to be able to hone in on precision medicine. I almost said precision education because we actually are talking about that as well. It's changing our curriculum.
You're the second person to say that to me.
Right. So yes, I think those do go hand in hand.
So in addition to your Saturday night stand-up live comedy thing you do, you're going to be dean of medicine and you're also going to be crunching data all the time.
There you go. Right. What could be better on a Saturday
night?
Can I ask?
Yes. What more can I ask? By the way, you don't have a family or anything else.
No, I do. Yes. Yeah.
Dr. Christner, I cannot thank you enough. You have been so good to talk to. And I really want to offer you, from our point of view, a genuine appreciation and a great deal of gratitude for what Baylor has done. You've always been sort of ahead of the crowd, and I think in many ways it's the reason you've earned the applause that you get. But most of all, I want to thank you also for providing us with a chance to understand how someone who, by your own admission, has had an extraordinary career is still able to be a full person. And that's a great thing to see happen, especially when it's for a woman physician. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and we'll come back and check on you again, okay?
Sounds great. All right, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Innovators, a production of Harris Search Associates. We'll have more insightful conversations with global thought leaders to follow.